shot the dog. They shot the dog.
A federal agent has been shot and killed in a confrontation with a fugitive in North Idaho.
You know, the word racist itself is a good word. It means proud of your race.
We need this for one man, his wife, and his kids in a cabin?
Come on, get a grip, people!
Weaver wanted to die.
I just wanted to kick the door down so I could take a couple with me.
We want to know how many are still alive up there!
Vicky is dead.
Somebody got away with murder.
And there was blood all over the floor.
There were going to be no heroes at Ruby Ridge.
In 1971, Randy Weaver and Vicki Jordison are married in Fort Dodge, Iowa. All indications point them towards a standard Midwestern lifestyle. But the Weavers want something different.
Well, back in 1980, I guess it was, we started thinking about moving. Sarah was going to go to school, public school back in Iowa, and at the time we weren't real thrilled about that.
At that time in Iowa, parents were barred from homeschooling their children. Angered by what they view as a corrupt government, and with their religious views growing more outside the mainstream, the Weavers decide to live a life of isolation in the mountains.
We thought it'd be nice to move to the mountains and raise a family, try to raise one out in the mountains, and teach kids at home, and we were just going to do it. Prepared for about a year, got our bills paid off, sold the house, got all our ducks in a row, you might say.
In August of 1983, the Weaver family leaves Iowa and the rest of society behind and heads west.
We weren't sure exactly where we were going to go, but we figured in the Rocky Mountains somewhere.
The Weavers finally settled in northern Idaho. The small logging village of Naples has always been fertile ground for people living outside the mainstream. First, as a destination for back-to-the-earth hippies. Then in the 80s, the Weavers are part of a wave of right-wing survivalists.
People up here care about each other and are tolerant of each other. I think they enjoy each other's differences.
The Weavers pay just $5,000 for a rocky hilltop plot of land where they build this plywood cabin primarily out of scraps from lumber yards. And like many families in Naples, they raise animals and grow their own food. It was an idyllic life for the Weavers' children, Sarah, Sam, and the youngest, Rachel.
This used to be a garden. I didn't realize how good I had it then, but I do now. I hope my kids get to experience it. You know, it doesn't sound as fun as it really was, but I guess you'd have to grow up that way.
As time passes, the Weavers' views move even further to the right. Their mistrust of the government increases, and the family's religious beliefs become steeped in thoughts of Armageddon and racism.
You know, the word racist itself is a good word. It means proud of your race.
He got told a few times that the people just didn't want to hear his political views.
He did come in and express his views about blacks and Jews and anybody that was not of the white race. You know, kind of gave me an idea that he was a little bit out of the mainstream.
Get the heck out of here! I didn't come all the way down here to...
But the Weavers are far from alone in their beliefs. Elsewhere in the Pacific Northwest, the white movement has become militant. A right-wing terrorist group calling itself The Order has gone on a campaign of violence, bombing banks, hijacking armored trucks, and even murdering a Jewish talk show host, all in the name of a new white homeland. After The Order is finally brought down, law enforcement quickly turns its attention to the Aryan Nations, the neo-Nazi political group where The Order had its genesis.
So we were very aggressive in our investigative efforts against these individuals and did everything we could to infiltrate the organization with sources of information.
The FBI, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, as well as state and local law enforcement, were all converging on the Aryan Nations. And in the wake of the recent terrorism in the Northwest, Aryan Nation's headquarters, located just 70 miles from the Weaver cabin, is inundated with paid federal informants.
One race, one vote, one nation, one people, one homeland. We're going to have it.
Each summer, the Aryan Nations holds a weekend retreat for its members and possible recruits. It's 3 days of speakers, events, and Nazi pep rallies.
They call it a World Congress. It's a gathering of white separatists, some of them supremacists, people with that philosophy, basically.
And it's at one of these congresses in 1986 where a federal informant posing as a gun-running biker and using the name Gus Magisano begins a 4-year relationship with an unassuming attendee, Randy Weaver.
I didn't have any idea the scrutiny that they were under by the federal government is Aryan Nation's place.
Over the next few years, Magisano slowly builds Randy's trust and offers him $700 for 2 sawed-off shotguns. In October of 1989, after sawing off the barrels himself, Randy Weaver sells the guns to Magisano. But soon after, Randy abruptly ends the relationship after learning that Magisano is actually a snitch. The ATF is now without an informant. So, with his connections to the white movement, a clean military background, and an arrestable offense to use as leverage, the ATF looks to replace Magisano with Randy Weaver.
Then I was approached by his bosses and said that they would bring federal firearms charges against me unless I joined their team, basically. And I said, well, I was not going to join their team and become an informant, and therefore they just carried it on from there, and it, got blown out of proportion after that. If I had to join their team and become a snitch and start working for them, none of this would have happened. Vicki and I was going out. We had a snowmobile down to the county road, and right there on the last bridge, there's an old Chevy pickup with a cab-over camper on it.
Posing as tourists with an overheated truck, ATF agents wait for Randy and Vicki to come and help.
As soon as I had my hands on top of the radiator and my foot up on the bumper, this guy reaches around and grabs me right here and says, "Freeze, federal agents!"
1 full year after selling the illegal guns, Randy is finally arrested. During his arraignment, he is allowed to sign over his property as bond. But the part-time federal magistrate mistakenly tells him that if found guilty, his property will be taken away. And with their paranoid fears now seemingly proving true, the Weavers decide that rather than facing their destiny in court, their only option is to stay on the mountain.
It wasn't just Dad. It was our whole family. And we didn't want him to go down because we figured they'd put him in jail for, sawing off shotguns, and we'd rather, stay on the mountain and live with our family, happily than have it be torn apart. But I guess that backfired.
Then we heard on the radio that the white supremacist Randy Weaver, blah, 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 didn't show up for court, but the U.S. Marshals will get their man.
Once Randy fails to appear in court, he officially becomes a federal fugitive, and his case is turned over to the U.S. Marshals Service. But unlike most cases, the Marshals know exactly where Randy is. In fact, the Weavers refuse to leave their hill, even for food. And it's during this time that they gain the support of a small group of local sympathizers.
The first day I went up there, I needed to know, did he or did he not saw the shotgun off? And he told me he didn't.
Randy and Vicki turn their holdout from the law into a moral stand. They believe they are victims of religious and political persecution at the hands of an unjust government.
I felt that Randy was being picked on because of his religious and his political views. And if it happened to Randy, it could have happened to me.
Vicki begins a letter-writing campaign, making clear their beliefs to friends, family, and even law enforcement.
She wrote one to the prosecutor, maybe, and she called them servants of the Queen of Babylon, which they are. They still are, the whole bunch of them. They're all servants of Babylon. She just made them all mad as hornets. I was proud of her. Still am.
But the letters do little to help Randy's cause, and in April of 1991, the Marshal Service sends the case file, including Vicky's letters, to a psychologist. They are sent back a psychological profile, mistakenly referring to the Weavers as the Randalls, that paints an extreme picture of a paranoid family led by a fierce matriarch who are all ready and willing to fight to the death. As the months pass, the Weavers remain holed up on their remote mountaintop, and the Marshals, hesitant to approach the cabin for fear of a possible confrontation, continue sending messages through friends. In October of '91, in a small guest shed on the Weaver property, Vicky gives birth to their fourth child, a baby girl named Elishaba. With winter approaching, the family prepares for the long months ahead, and with plenty of more pressing cases, the Marshals leave the Weavers alone on their hilltop. But on March 8, 1992, a full year since Randy's stand had begun, a nearby newspaper from Spokane, Washington, publishes a front-page article about a local fugitive snubbing his nose at the federal government. Within days, the story catches the eye of the national media. Randy Weaver and the tough talk coming from his remote mountain quickly becomes a thorn in the side of the Marshal Service.
You put up a bluff. You ever played poker?
Back in Washington, the U.S. Marshal Service is raising the stakes. 3 weeks after the first story is printed, a special meeting is held at Marshals headquarters. Based on neighbors' warnings, the now numerous news reports, and the growing mythology surrounding the Weavers, this remote cabin in the Idaho woods becomes the center of a complex surveillance and apprehension plan dubbed Operation Northern Exposure. During the next 5 months, the Marshal Service records over 100 hours of surveillance footage from solar-powered cameras strategically planted around the Weaver property.
It's a total invasion of privacy, you know? It's like if my brother would have found out some of the stuff I did, you know, I'd be embarrassed enough, let alone the government.
The surveillance clearly shows that the Weavers are almost always armed and seem to be prepared for some kind of confrontation. The cameras also show the family now joined by Kevin Harris, a 23-year-old man from Spokane who had lived with the Weavers as a teenager and looks up to Randy as a father figure. As surveillance escalates, so does media coverage. The national press seems drawn to the Weaver story. Randy is billed as a local folk hero, and his plywood cabin is transformed into a mountaintop fortress.
It became blatantly obvious they were being watched, but yet they kept waiting for someone to come to their door.
In the early morning hours of August 21st, 1992, a team of 6 deputy U.S. Marshals, fully armed and outfitted with night vision goggles, hike up the Weavers' Hill to gather intelligence for the final phase of Operation Northern Exposure. After 8 hours of surveying the terrain and watching the Weavers, their day is done and they begin to sneak back down the mountain. But for some reason, things don't proceed as planned. And in the hurried confusion, tragedy is about to strike.
Our yellow lab striker was so worked up and excited that I figured it had to be probably a mountain lion or a bear. And Kevin and Sam come down around behind and followed me. And I said, well, I'm going to go down the logging road and I'll meet you down at the Y. And they was following the dog through the woods. Actually, I didn't know which way the dog was going to go for sure, but I wasn't going to go tramping off through the woods chasing the dog. Getting old and lazy, you know.
14-year-old Sam Weaver and Kevin Harris, 23, both armed and anticipating a wild animal, split off from Randy and chased the dog through the woods.
And I got about maybe right to here, and some guy jumped from the right side of the Y there down, I don't know, 6, 8, 10 foot right down in the center there. I could tell he had a weapon, and he was fully camoed out. All I could see basically was his eyes, and I saw his mouth move. He yelled at me, he said, "Freeze, Weaver." I said, "Screw you," and turned and started running back up the hill. And I was yelling all the time. I said, get home, boys, it's an ambush."
The boys don't hear Randy, and they continue chasing the dog through the woods until they come upon the Marshals. Sam Weaver's dog, Striker, reaches the Marshals first.
And I heard a bang. I heard, "Arr, arr, arr." They shot the dog, they shot the dog.
In the next few seconds, a flurry of panicked gunfire breaks out between the Marshals and the boys. and amidst the chaos, a deputy U.S. Marshal is shot and killed.
I said, get home, and Sam yells, I'm coming, Dad, and then there was a bunch more shooting, and took my shotgun, aimed it up in the air, and pulled the trigger, and straight up in the air, I didn't know what to do. It was after that, it was like everything was over with.
With an officer down in unfamiliar territory, two of the deputies that were not in the gunfight run for nearly an hour through the woods and down the hill to the nearest neighbor, where they make a frantic call to 911.
I got one officer dead. I got 3 pinned down. I need help quick. We had an incident with Randy Weaver. I want the state police. I want all the help here I can get. I've got to go back in for more officers that are trapped. Where are you calling?
But the officers are not trapped. In fact, the marshals are completely unaware that the Weavers have also suffered a loss.
I got home pretty shortly, and then a little shortly after that, Kevin come walking home, and we said, where's Sam? And he said, Sam's dead.
Samuel Weaver, Randy and Vicky's 14-year-old son, was killed in the firefight, shot once in the arm and once through the back.
When Kevin said Sam's dead, well, we just lost it. You know, we were up there and we were just, I was cussing and screaming and crying and combination. Nobody yelled at us, nobody shot at us. I figured these guys had split the scene.
Randy, Vicky, and Kevin bring Sam back up the old logging road to their cabin, where they clean his wounds and place his body in the same shed where his baby sister, Elishaba, was born just 10 months before.
The last thing I remember about my brother was he had gone down to the garden. He had his own special radish patch, and I started to follow him down there, and he's all, go away, leave me alone, I want to be alone. And so there was an uprooted stump over here, and I went behind it and I started crying, and he came over and he apologized to me. And that was the first time he'd ever apologized to me for making me leave and making me cry, you know. And it was just, you know, it's a great thing to remember, I guess. At the last moment that you remember your brothers like that.
Meanwhile, caught off guard and ill-prepared to handle a federal situation, local law enforcement evacuates the neighbors and closes off the entire mountain.
Because I didn't know what was going to happen. I had no idea this was something that I had not been schooled in or prepared for in any way, shape, or form.
The news of federal officers pinned down by gunfire deep in the Idaho woods was quickly reaching Washington. And the one thing the Marshal Service was trying so hard to avoid, an armed conflict with children, was now right in front of them.
I got 3 pinned down. I need help quick.
Good afternoon. A federal agent has been shot and killed in a confrontation with a fugitive in North Idaho. Weaver, a fugitive on a federal firearms
Whenever a federal officer is killed, government policy dictates that the matter be turned over immediately to the FBI. But on August 21st, 1992, the FBI had never heard of Ruby Ridge or Randy Weaver. All they knew was what they were hearing from the panicking marshals.
Got a call from FBI headquarters, and he advised there'd been a shooting up at Ruby Ridge and that a marshal had been killed. The marshals were pinned down. We basically had 2 functions going up there. One was the rescue of the marshals, and the other one was the arrest of Randy Weaver.
The situation, as presented, leads to the decision to call in the FBI's secret weapon, the Hostage Rescue Team, or HRT, perhaps the most elite squad of snipers and assaulters in the world. And on the way out to Idaho, somewhere over the Great Plains, Dick Rogers, the head of the HRT, in consultation with FBI Assistant Director Larry Potts, agreed that the possibility of entering an ongoing gunfight, combined with the intelligence they were receiving on the Weaver family, warranted extreme measures. They begin to draft special rules of engagement to give the snipers more freedom than the standard FBI shooting policy, an action unprecedented in FBI history. But the threat of a firefight has long since subsided, and the marshals are finally taken safely down the hill with the help of the Idaho State Police.
I had a bad feeling about this situation before I even left home. But, you know, I'd been in 300 plus situations, and, you know, I remember now saying to my wife, well, I don't feel good about this one. And turned out to be an accurate vibe.
On Saturday morning, almost 24 hours after the initial firefight, as law enforcement from all over the region mobilized to the remote hilltop, a briefing is held with FBI negotiators, the HRT's tactical team, and on-scene commander, Gene Glenn.
Gene Glenn is in charge, and in theory, the way the FBI manages is the negotiation team leader makes his recommendations, and the tactical team leader makes his recommendations, and the on-scene commander makes his decision from there.
But with the mere presence of Dick Rogers and the HRT, the question as to the seriousness of the situation seems to have already been answered.
Kind of almost reverse psychology, you know. If they're here, it must be bad. Whereas if we sent out a county team of 5 guys and a couple of negotiators, you know, this is nothing, a barricaded subject. But if these guys are on scene, whoa, you know, this is something bad's about to happen here.
Perhaps the most intimidating show of power is the FBI's use of the tank-like Armored Personnel Carrier, or APC, the appearance of which begins to have a startling effect on the locals, typical Western individualists who don't take kindly to intimidation.
Come on! Whatever it is, both sides are wrong. This is getting crazy. This is absolutely... Come on, get a grip, people!
How many of you against one is there, huh? We want a head count. We want to know how many are still alive up there.
As the day progresses, the FBI sets up a field headquarters in a small meadow just at the foot of the Weavers' Hill. And even though the marshals at this point are quite safe, and there has been no shooting at all for at least 24 hours, the buildup continues, and the rules of engagement somehow remain as part of the operations plan.
In my 27 years as an agent, I've been involved in an awful lot of arrests, an awful lot of raids, and this is the first time we'd use rules of engagement.
Dick Rogers said that any adult male with a weapon was a target.
The FBI's standard deadly force policy allows agents to shoot only as a defensive measure, but the final rules of engagement that are faxed to Washington include the statement, if any adult male is observed with a weapon, deadly force can and should be employed. The guns which the Weavers thought would protect them were now the very things that made them targets. Washington approves the plan, and snipers are immediately dispatched to the hill to create a perimeter around the Weaver cabin.
See how quiet it is right now? Just the way it was.
As the snipers settle into position, the FBI prepares to approach the cabin, and the Weavers wait.
The other 2 dogs started barking a little bit and whimpering, and we was all in the house at the time, and I told everybody, I said, well, there's probably somebody out there approaching and they want to talk to us. So I said, I'm going to go out and see if they want what they got to say.
Randy, his 16-year-old daughter Sarah, and Kevin Harris leave the cabin to see if anyone is there.
Well, nobody wants to talk. It's apparent they don't want to talk to us, so I come walking from the outcropping over there.
When no one responds, Randy goes to check the guest shed where Sam's body has been laying since the morning before.
Come around the shed and I switched the rifle to my left hand, and there was a latch up about this high on the door that you had to turn to open the door. I was going to go in and see Sam again, and just as I grabbed that latch, somebody shot me through this shoulder.
After hearing the gunshot, Vicki Weaver comes to the front of the house and calls for Randy and the kids to get inside.
Sarah started pushing me, get in the house, and she was pushing me. Kevin come down off the rock outcropping and joined in behind us. And 1, 2, 3, we was all going like this to the house.
As the 3 run for the cabin, the sniper holds his fire until they approach the door.
Vicki was holding the door, standing right here holding the door. The door would have been right here. She's holding it like this with Elishaba. The bullet went run through Vicky's head and killed her, and that same bullet went into Kevin's left arm and tore it up real bad, and then it split up. And the main bullet kept going in and lodged about that far from his heart.
I didn't know where Mom was hit, but I knew something was wrong because she was down, and I just started, like, saying Mom and crying.
As you can imagine, that was a very chilling moment when shots were fired. And the sniper observer team wasn't sure what they hit.
After 18 months of refusing to come down, any second chances Randy may have had are now gone. The confrontation the Weavers had predicted has come true. A U.S. Marshal has been killed. Sam's body is still in the shed. Randy and Kevin are both wounded, and Vicky now lay dead in the kitchen.
When I turned around and saw him laying there, I knew from then on we were dead meat. They were just murdering us now. And you have to be there to understand the feeling. It was like I didn't even care anymore. I just wanted to kick the door down so I could take a couple with me.
The first person to actually speak out to Randall Weaver was the head of the hostage rescue team, Dick Rogers.
He gave a surrender demand?
Yeah, he had an ultimatum, come on out or else we're going to start crushing your buildings and push your house down the cliff. And
we got no response from the cabin at all.
Words are like bullets, as they come out of your mouths, you can't call them back. Makes an ultimatum like that, you can't call it back.
Meanwhile, 3 miles from the cabin, where law enforcement has closed the road, locals have started to gather in protest to what they see as an outlandish show of force on the part of the federal government.
We need some warm bodies. You into it?
Yeah, they were real concerned. What's going on in my neighborhood? Why have all these armed men suddenly descended into my community? It's a shock.
Yeah, you're all bad with all your guns. Oh, you kids.
But the people at the roadblock, as well as law enforcement, are still unaware of the tragedy that has just transpired on the ridge above.
Randy Weaver has told friends all he wants is to be left alone. But with the sudden appearance of military hardware like this, his one-man stand against the law is suddenly taking on the appearance of a full-blown war.
We need this for one man, his wife, and his kids in a cabin?
On day 3 of the standoff, with more troops still arriving, earth-moving equipment is brought in to widen the roads and build a new bridge, allowing larger trucks and even more equipment up the mountain.
The command post area was taking on kind of a little community appearance. It was growing very rapidly, and it seemed like new people were showing up all the time. It was a busy little place.
Some people were getting ready to go to work, some people were just getting off of work, other people were playing horseshoes or jogging or taking a shower. Only thing we didn't have was a movie theater.
Don Kasoulis was part of an FBI SWAT team from Denver, Colorado. They were one of the few units at Ruby Ridge that spoke out against the special rules of engagement.
I remember I just said, that's ridiculous, or that's crazy, and we kind of talked about it, and we decided we weren't going to go by those rules.
Don't you think we ought to consider when we can shoot and when we can't? Shouldn't that be, foremost in our minds? Apparently it wasn't.
The FBI uses a remote-controlled robot to place a phone near the Weaver's door. Speaking through the phone, the negotiations team attempts to establish a dialogue. And even though their initial attempts fail, to the negotiators, the situation is simple.
As far as I'm concerned, it's an easy barricade sitting on top of a mountain. Why don't we just sit here and wait?
Everything ran into one day for me. I don't remember night from day, and I just remember I took care of Elishba most of the time. I remember going into the pantry to get food, and there was blood all over the floor.
The next big thing we heard was like tracked vehicle coming in the yard, and we heard a lot of scrunching and crashing, and while they were running over the woodshed, and I told the kids that, you know, they're going to push the house over. That's what I thought they were going to do.
The FBI uses the APC to clear out the area and gain control of the property, but it comes to a stop just before the guest shed.
For some reason, one of the HRT guys just jumped out of the APC out the back and opened up this door, and that's when they discovered Sam's body.
Sam's body had been lying in the shed for 2 days. At that point, the possibility that any of the Weavers might have been hurt had not even been considered.
We had no information that he'd even been shot at. So these are all things that happen, and you can have all the control of things. You can control property, high ground, and everything. But people's minds. And we didn't know what they were thinking because we couldn't understand their losses. And that changed everything.
The discovery of Sam's death sends a shockwave through law enforcement. And with tension running high down at the roadblock, the FBI decides to wait until daylight to break the news.
Federal officials have just announced Randy Weaver's 13-year-old son died during the initial shootout Friday. Protesters and neighbors are apparently not taking the news well.
Are you proud of yourself? Are you proud of yourself? You're going to kill all the children to get one man.
When they discovered Sam's body, it kind of ratcheted up that feeling of being in some kind of out-of-control tragedy.
On Tuesday, day 5 of the standoff, the FBI finally investigates the crime scene. They quickly learn that what the marshals had been reporting may have been greatly exaggerated.
You know, if you're pinned down for 12 hours, there's going to be several hundred rounds that have been fired, maybe several thousand rounds to pin down that many people. And we didn't find the shell casings. We didn't find the rounds. Found a few.
The special rules of engagement, which are still officially in place, are finally called off. On Wednesday, August 26th, on the other side of the country, in Quincy, Massachusetts, services are held for U.S. Deputy Marshal William Deegan, who was killed in the same shootout that killed Sam. Back in Idaho, the roadblock protest has turned into an around-the-clock vigil. As word spreads, the tone at the roadblock changes. The locals are joined by neo-Nazis and skinheads who have come from all over the country to show their support for the Weavers and their beliefs.
We had heard on the local news that there were people gathering at the roadblock, which felt good. If they started shooting us up and everything, well, the people down at the roadblock would have known something was wrong.
That afternoon, Randy and Kevin dictate a note to Sarah, detailing exactly what they remember in case they don't make it off the mountain.
Is there any agent here that represents Gene Glenn from the Federal Bureau of Investigation?
The standoff in Naples, Idaho has taken an unusual turn.
Bo Greitz, a retired Army colonel renowned for his work on behalf of U.S. soldiers missing in action, performed what he calls a citizen's arrest on 4 top officials.
We, as citizens of the United States, do hereby present this citizen's arrest warrant. The whole idea was I wasn't going to arrest the governor of Idaho. I wanted action. I wanted somebody to listen to me. I wanted somebody to let me through so I could go up to the top of the ridge, not be dressed in Kevlar, carrying a submachine gun, so that maybe Weaver would talk to me.
Consider yourself served.
Then one day they said that Colonel Bo Greitz had showed up at the roadblock down below, and the next time they hollered at me, I hollered back and I told him, I said, I'll talk to Bo Greitz.
The FBI lets Bo Greitz, a Green Beret commander and right-wing icon, pass the roadblock to talk to Randy, even though they know he's a risk.
Especially knowing his political stance and his connections to some of these right-wingers. Sure, it was riskier.
And, this was no good. I couldn't talk to Weaver, so I jumped off the tank, and I came right over here. I said, Weaver, this is Bo Greitz. And I saw his face just flash right there in the window of the bathroom.
Bo accomplished more during that first evening than all the negotiation had from the beginning to that point. And so that was a positive thing. The negative of Bo's dialogue was we found out a lot of things that were kind of shocking.
And then is when he told me about Vicky, and I was shocked.
I've never been shocked by any single event in my 21 years as I was by that one sentence uttered by Randall Weaver. Vicky's been killed, I've been shot, and Kevin's been shot.
Randy's in good health. Unfortunately, Vicky is dead.
Karen, the news earlier tonight, just a few moments ago, that Vicky Weaver, the wife of Randall Weaver, has been shot and killed. She was shot and killed last Saturday and has been dead for 6 days. It's a very volatile situation, although it appears to be quiet at this moment.
Yes, this will be a tense night on the roadblock.
It never entered our mind that she was anything but an active person in the cabin up there. So that was a tough night.
Never will you take another woman down. Never. May we die. We're going to war.
A lot of anger. Just hoping for daylight and hoping for something better.
This morning began very hopeful after last night's very tragic news that Vicky Weaver had been killed. In fact, there was word buzzing through all quarters that this might indeed be the big day.
On day 9 of the standoff, Bo Greitz returns at dawn to keep the dialogue going, and Randy Weaver makes sure that Bo understands what actually happened.
The door's open like this. Yep. She comes out and says, what happened? I said, I'm here. She goes, those sons of bitches. She turns around and here's the door. They knew she was there. My daughter and her and the baby was right there.
As the Weavers tell Bo their story, they learn that one of their biggest fears was true.
That thing's got a shotgun on it, huh? No, I don't want it.
Yeah, it's sawed-off shotgun, boy, right there. You
I don't want to see it.
grab that telephone, boom!
The robot was sitting right in front, right up against and right in front of the door. The robot had a claw, and it had a 12-gauge shotgun that was pointed right in the door.
That's right. The robot did have a weapon. I forget what it was, a shotgun or something. But once again, as far as I know, that was an oversight.
The first real human being in all this heartbreak and trauma and tragedy to come in there to Randy was Jackie.
The next thing I knew, Bo was approaching me about going up, and it just happened before I knew it.
The FBI allows Jackie Brown, a friend of Vicky's who has been at the roadblock since the beginning, to go up and help Bo with negotiations. Randy and the girls immediately allow Jackie in. She is the first person inside the cabin since she had visited Vicky a few days before the standoff.
It wasn't a happy place anymore. It had already been proven that if they stuck their head out, they'd be shot. There's no doubt about that at that point. They believed they were going to die there, sure.
Not yet ready to give up their fight, the Weavers give Jackie a list of supplies they need and the note they had written a few days before.
That was the biggest and most important thing to us, to me anyway. Even if they killed us after that, our side of the story got out. Because at that point, I still don't think we were going to get out alive.
On day 10, Bo returns to the cabin with one objective, to get Kevin Harris out. In the days since the shooting, Kevin's wound had become badly infected and had put him close to death.
I said, Weaver, if I have anything to do with this, if I can testify before the jury, I said, if I were on the jury, you'd fry if you let that boy die in here.
At 1:47 p.m., Kevin Harris finally surrenders. His wounds are immediately treated at a field medical tent before being flown directly to a Spokane hospital. On that same day, Jackie returns with the donated food and supplies. She and Bo take care of the next order of business, removing Vicky's body.
But I picked her up right here, and so as I walked to carry her out, gosh, they just were wailing. I've never heard such, and I've been around people that have endured, families that have endured death too much. They were just wailing and crying, and they were saying the same thing, Bo, please, please don't let our mama's body touch the ground.
Dick Rogers was standing there with a group of FBI agents, and I simply stated I needed something to clean with. They had shut the water off, and they handed me 2 5-gallon buckets of water and towels and paper towels, and I went back in the cabin and cleaned.
Jackie Brown is allowed to clean the kitchen, unwittingly destroying evidence that could potentially damage the FBI.
Anytime that a crime scene is disturbed, there's evidence that's lost. And when Vicki Weaver's blood was cleaned up, there had to be some loss of evidence.
But it was just something that had to be done.
That night, even with all the progress being made, the HRT begins to show signs that they are getting restless.
Dick Rogers told me, if you cannot get them out by noon, we are taking them out.
You know, we've already done so many incredibly stupid things. This is just one more incredibly stupid thing.
On the morning of the 11th day, no one in the vigil knew the pressure that Bo was under to get Randy and the girls out safely.
Randy said, Bo, is that you? And I said, yes, it is, Weaver. And then he said what I knew he was going to say. He said, we have prayed all night, Bo, the girls and I. He said, we have decided that they are going to have to kill us just like they killed our mama and our little brother.
Bo Greitz has no more time to appease the family. He has to get the Weavers out right then and there.
He said, Weaver, tonight's the night. They're coming after you. If you don't come out, you got to come out now or you're going to be dead and all this. And by this time, I had a feeling that maybe we could come out without getting shot. And so I said, this is it, girls. We got to go now. You know, and so we did.
I had Randy Weaver with an iron grip, and I looked over, and Randy had Elishaba, and by God, we walked down that hill. And his little girls, I think, while they were terrified, I think they honestly began to think that maybe they wouldn't be shot down. And God, that's what you're supposed to think in America, for crying out loud.
2 words it seems that all of us have been waiting to hear. It's over. An 11-day standoff that took 3 lives has now ended with the surrender of Randy Weaver.
Randy is taken into custody and immediately flown by helicopter to medical attention before being taken to jail in Boise by private jet. It is the first time he's ever flown.
Randy, you have anything you want to say?
Both Randy Weaver and Kevin Harris are charged with murder and conspiracy. After a 3-month trial, Kevin Harris is found not guilty on all charges and released a free man. Randy is found not guilty of all but the original failure to appear charge, for which he serves an additional 6 months in jail.
If I could, you know, do over and then I could read the guy's mind, I wouldn't have sold him those guns. But as far as anything else concerned, no, I'd do it again.
In 1994, the Weaver family files a civil suit, and 1 year later, the federal government settles for $3.1 million.
Nobody came out of Ruby Ridge looking good. I think to a sense, everybody there was a victim.
We fouled up in front of the entire world, and it should never have happened. And I think it was just a really disappointing day for the FBI.
The FBI later admits to covering up facts during the court case, and the rules of engagement are deemed unconstitutional.